Hello, and you are listening to Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. If you are listening for the first time, I interview leaders who inspire me in the areas of hardcore IT security, IT business leadership, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and fearless living principles. Welcome to the show. Today I reached out to Kelley Dempsey and we had a wonderful talk about printer security. Now, why did I want to talk about printer security? Well, recently Kelley just co-authored a paper about risk management for replication devices, and it's going to be released here very shortly. And as I read through the document, I was struck by how practical and how informative the material was in the document. And it's document 8023. From a CIO's perspective, there seems to be this never-ending flood of items to watch for IT security. And this is a relatively overlooked area because it's usually obscured with support contracts. And we really just don't take replication devices and non-volatile storage under the purview for patching and for risk management and what that represents for the organization, for your organization. So today, Kelley and I dive into this and we dive into the particulars. So as you drive to work, as you listen to this show, I want you to really sit back and say, how can I just tackle this and get it done? It is not the sexiest part of one's job to be able to deal with printer security. But when you look at the potential issues with network takedowns, botnets, and the potential compliance issues with having storage on your network that may not be erasable, or an operating system on a printing device that is not supportable by the manufacturer, it starts to take on a different light. So my voice is starting to fade from a cold, so I'm going to transition into the show right now. Kelley is a senior information security specialist. She works for NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, in their Information Technology Laboratory in the Computer Security Division. Kelley has quite an extensive bio, which I'll put on our website. But in particular, she's co-authored and been a major contributor to many 800 series special publications that are related to continuous monitoring, security-focused configuration management, this replicatable device printer subject we're talking about, and the list goes on. So with nothing more to say about Kelley, let's continue with the show. Maybe we could get started by just talking a little bit about the latest paper that, is it technically up for review right now, or have you actually published it?
Well, we are waiting to publish it. We went through the public comment process, as we do with all of NIST special public, or any NIST publication. And so we've been through that process. We received public comments, and we adjudicated the comments and made changes, based on those comments. And so right now we're waiting just for signatures, and we're hoping to publish it any day now, the final version.
Oh, fantastic. So how does NIST determine a topic like the one we're talking about, which the title of the paper, unless it's been changed, is Risk Management for Replication Devices, right?
Right, and it has not been changed. The title is the same. Sometimes the topics are just suggested to us, or we get so many customers are requesting certain topics, or sometimes we get mandated to, like a lot of the other documents that I work on, the NIST Risk Management Framework documents or the continuous monitoring document, things along those lines, those get mandated to us from either a law like FISMA or from Office of Management and Budget. Sometimes executive orders will direct us to write a publication. So it really depends. But in this particular case, actually it was internally. Someone was very concerned at what they were seeing. I actually think, funny enough, that they had seen something on TV, like a report on 60 Minutes or 2020 or something like that, about replication devices and in particular the storage issues. And so they were concerned about internal NIST use, and they came to us, and so then I was asked to write up like a sort of a risk management, more of a risk assessment methodology for our internal people at NIST to go through. So I did that, and I guess it came out so well that our division chief said, we should make that a public document. And so that's how this one in particular came about. So it really varies how we come upon topics to write about.
Well, this one is particularly fascinating. I've obviously spent quite a lot of time in the IT security arena, and printers and replication devices and non-volatile storage, that just isn't an area that presents itself frequently. But gosh, it's very logical that you would tackle this. And what kind of comments have you gotten? I guess we haven't been out public yet, but from the peer review process, has it been well received?
It wasn't, and it was out for public comment, not just peer review. So it has been well received, and the comments were all very positive, and we just had a few suggestions for improvements. And, a lot of times the comments that we get just, you made a typo, and which is always helpful as well. We welcome all comments. But, very positive response, and I hope it'll be helpful to organizations. And it's an often overlooked weakness, and a lot of people don't even realize that there is non-volatile storage in their, replication devices. So.
Well, let's actually break the non-volatile storage piece down, because of any term that would be worth defining, how would you define a non-volatile storage and its application within a company?
Well, non-volatile storage is storage media like a hard drive or a USB stick or anything like that retains the information when it does not have power to it. So, when we turn off our computers, our hard drives still retain all of our data and everything, and so it's non-volatile in that it does retain that data, and in most cases it will retain it indefinitely. And so that's a big issue because, again, a lot of people weren't even aware that replication devices had non-volatile storage in them, and sometimes the larger ones have a giant hard drive just like you have in your PCs or servers, and that everything that you ever copied or replicated was stored in there, and then they were, those non-volatile storage devices can be removed, and that information can be retrieved quite easily. So does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And what's interesting too, Kelley, is that I brought this up to our CTO, and he goes, Bill, of course, most of these printers are running XP operating systems. And gosh, that if people knew that, how would we react? Or did you find any other weaknesses? How is that being addressed? Like companies, the examination of the type of OS that are being run in these devices?
Right. Well, again, I think that's something that a lot of organizations weren't really paying much attention to, which is why our alert internal NIST employee was wise to bring this to our attention. And so as far as the operating systems go, a lot of times, right, you have an embedded operating system that maybe can't even be updated. So when we actually first started this, we were finding that there was still printers with Windows 2000 that had been embedded and could not be updated. So this is a big problem, and that's something that when you go through the process and the sort of question and response risk assessment that we have in the Appendix A, I think it's Appendix A, one of the appendices in our pub, which, by the way, is NIST Interagency Report or NIST IR 8023. So that's one of the things for people to pay attention to. What OS is it running, and can that be updated, when security updates come out? Or, as in the case of 2000 and now XP, updates aren't even being done for them anymore at all, even if you were able to do the updates. So that's a big problem.
Yeah, that's important. Those points you're mentioning on patch cycles and such, it's very frequently hard enough for small to medium enterprises, and for that matter, large, to just go through a patch cycle just on your core operating systems. And then when you deal with Flash and Java, and it gets even harder. And then to add in printers, it could really stretch an organization's capabilities.
Right, and not only their capabilities to do the patch, but again, in some cases, the printer or the replication device didn't even allow for that. Like, you couldn't even patch it even if you wanted to in some cases. And we were finding that years ago when I was still doing assessments, and we were finding a lot of instances of replication devices couldn't even update. And I'm hoping that with the newer replication devices that has been improved, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But it's certainly something that organizations need to pay attention to when they're making purchases.
That's exactly right. And what I love about this document, you got very practical steps in regards to service providers, because from my experience, most CIOs at the operational level, they've turned the printers into a commodity process that they've outsourced as much as possible. So gosh, this is almost like a flavor of cloud computing. You can't get rid of the risk, you can only manage it through contracts.
That's right. And if you're going to lease the printer, you definitely need to be careful with what is in your contract and who owns what, especially with respect to the non-volatile storage devices that are inside, internally, within the replication device. Who owns that when you're all done with that device?
That's a good point. So that, as far as managing risk, are you thinking that most CIOs that have, and it could be hundreds and hundreds of printers, that the best way to tackle this, one of the ways to tackle it would be from a contract point of view?
If they're leased, then yes. Then you would absolutely have to make sure that these security issues are addressed in your contract. If you're purchasing the printers outright or the replication devices outright, and you are then getting a service contract where you still own the device, but you're having someone, you're paying a service contractor just to service them, then, you still have to watch out in your service contract what is allowed and what isn't allowed. But yeah, it's very important either way to address. It's always important in any IT situation to address security and risk management in your contracts.
Kelley, has there been any stories or any threats that have emerged, or are you just looking around the corner from an education point of view for the market?
No, there's definitely threats. Threats have been exercised. The printers have been. One thing we actually added in the final version that's going to come out is the use of printers or replication devices as hot points or relay points, since they're known to be less managed than other devices that might be on the network. The attackers are out there looking when they're running their scans. They're looking for printers because they have better luck getting onto the printers, and then they can use them when they're networked as relay devices to go on to other devices on the network, and also to disguise their whereabouts, and also as part of a botnet, they can use the processing power and storage power and memory in the replication devices as part of a botnet. And again, it doesn't get discovered as readily or noticed as much, and it doesn't have a good secure configuration, as servers and desktops might. That makes sense?
Sure. So you're seeing kind of a DOS capability that can be done.
Yeah.
So to disrupt the enterprise in addition to, so that's interesting and completely plausible.
It's happened. It's happening. It's not theoretical.
Okay. So from a practical point of view, on section 3.2, you've had some very good suggestions on kind of an implementation, like how someone would implement these, I guess more from a development acquisition section, but how a decision maker could approach the problem, and sort of what would be like a practical way that a decision maker could address the non-volatile storage element as a takeaway to listening to you and I talk.
Okay, well, first, if they would want to understand what non-volatile storage the replication device has within, and then the important thing to remember or to want security-wise in your replication device, if it has that non-volatile storage, is the ability to overwrite those images. And so there's actually replication devices out there that provide that capability, so you can just press a button and overwrite the image that you just replicated. And so when you have confidentiality concerns especially, that's going to be very important. So that's something to bring up. It depends on what is going to be copied, and that's why it's risk management. So you start out by determining what is going to be replicated on the device. depending on what part of the organization it's in, maybe it doesn't matter the confidentiality of the things being replicated. But when it does matter, then you want to be looking at those things and make sure that you have that image overwrite capability, and physical protections can be put in place as well.
That's a good point. So, for example, if this is outside of the legal department or outside of your lab space that you are developing new products in, it might have a different risk threshold than another area of the business that just doesn't have the same impact.
Exactly. I mean, if your company's making copies of flyers for advertisements or something, then who cares? You're not going to want to spend the extra money to pay for those types of security capabilities when they're not needed. And so, that's determining what making security protections commensurate with risk. So if you don't have those risks, you don't need to spend money to provide those protections. But if you do need those protections, then that's why you go through this process. And that's why some of the questions, asked, do you need these things? How is the printer going to be used? Those questions are asked in Section 3.1 in the initiation phase. Who will use the device? Where will it be located? Will it be connected to the network? What is the impact level of the information to be processed? And then there's, multiple other questions there. But when you have the answer to those questions, then that helps you determine what you need to spend money on, what or if you need to spend money on security capabilities.
Yeah, and sometimes I find NIST is sort of like the bellwether of, at least when we're talking with people, well, we follow a NIST process, and that's seen as is the toughest, most secure standard, and sometimes somewhat challenging for companies that don't have tremendous resources to implement at the same time. What I did like about this document is that if you go right to Section 3.1 and 3.2, you're right there at some very practical suggestions that you just mentioned. Like, do you have the overwrite capability, and doing a simple risk assessment on, do we care? I mean, is the items that being copied, do we care? Does it represent risk?
Right. Exactly. You never want to spend money on security where you don't need it, and you need to save that money to apply it to security where you do need it.
So the way I hear about this is that the immediate item here is potentially these devices can be hijacked and used as a point of a network takedown. They can also be leveraged to form a botnet, and potentially, since they're so easy to access the storage, the data there, unless it's being overwritten, which you have to check, could be a point of significant vulnerability for a savvy hacker. Can you think of any other items that I've missed for that a CIO and a top-level decision maker would need to be aware of regarding this topic?
Well, again, back to the impact level of the information, another thing to consider is encrypting the information when it is in transit between your PCs or servers and the printer or the replication device, and is that something that's needed, and whether or not the device can be configured so that it doesn't come with a bunch of open ports. Is it configurable so that you can close those ports so that they're not open ports that attackers can leverage to get in? So there's a lot of things to consider, and we mostly sort of categorized it into storage issues and network-based issues. So if your replication device is not going to be connected to a network, and you're just going to, it's just going to be a copier, and people are just going to have to physically come to it and make copies, then some of these issues obviously go away. So again, it's just important to consider how is the device going to be used, and then that should lead you to determine what extra capabilities you may need to pay for.
Sure, because it may just be you want to watch it with auditing or logging tools, or
Right.
maybe segment it some way, either physically or virtually. So I guess that would drive a lot of their next steps.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I applaud you in putting this together. This is I find, kind of an in-the-weeds topic, but it's incredibly practical because, what percentage of your computing assets, printers, I don't know if you've done any research in that area to find out how many printers on average are in a company.
No, we have not done any research on that, but when we did it internally, we found out that there was a lot of printers on people's desktops that had just been purchased and nothing had been addressed as far as the questions that we're asking now in the NIST IR. And so I'm sure that is the same at every company. So especially if you have a lot of desktop printers, what's in there? We don't even know if they have hard drives in those things. So the non-volatile storage issues came into play a lot there. But no, we don't know. But I imagine in most organizations, you're going to have quite a lot of printers out there. So,
which are now really connected devices with servers built into them between
right.
desktop printers and network group printers and workroom printers. It's quite substantial. So this is definitely in the Internet of Things sphere something that we definitely want to pay attention to.
It is, and I mean, it's just like with anything else. You have to start the exercise with finding out what you have. And when the issue was raised and we went to start looking at it, that's when we found out, wow, we really have all of these devices here that no one was really paying attention to. And just finding out what you have and getting to the bottom of it is a great start, especially if you have a larger organization. Just determining what replication devices you have, which ones are networked, which ones have non-volatile storage, and all of those things, and then moving forward with a better procurement process, like we talked about earlier, with addressing this in contracts, so that at least going forward, the attention it needs can be paid.
Well, this is great. Kelley, do you have any other potential projects that you're working on for the future that either build upon this or that are interested in you, near and dear to you, that we can see from NIST over the next year?
We're not really planning to build on this, but like I said, sometimes things evolve, so no plans to build on this that I know of, but let's see, what else are we working on? A lot of the things we work on are for in federal only.
So sometimes what you're saying is some of the material that we read from NIST can be, to apply it to a small to medium business, we can sort of abstract some of the practical pieces from it. Is your philosophy in general one of a checklist-based approach, or do you try to use the risk-based approach, for example, with this replication devices example?
Right. Well, we definitely go with a risk-based approach. So a lot of the documents that I work on are related to the Federal Information Security Management Act, now recently updated to the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. And the whole crux behind that act, both acts, is security commensurate with risk. And you can only do that by doing risk management. And the checklist approach is a one-size-fits-all approach, whereas the risk management approach is flexible and scalable. And because one size doesn't fit all with information security, organizations have different impacts. They have different operational environments. They have different missions, and they have different threats against them. And so it's important that organizations understand what those threats are and how specifically they can address them in their own operations of environment. So to me, that's why the checklist approach, it might be okay for some organizations, but I think in most cases you're going to be either applying controls that you don't need because your impact is lower than what the checklist is specifying, or maybe it's not going to be enough. Maybe things are going to be missed. It's just,
Yeah.
Plus, maybe also you're going to miss out on, again, having an understanding of what you're really doing instead of just blindly following a checklist.
Well, I really appreciate you for coming on the show, Kelley. This has been very enlightening, and I'm really happy that NIST tackled this subject, because I think it's going to be very educational to the security community, and in particular, small and medium organizations, which make up the bulk of U.S. companies. So thank you very much. So there you have it. That was my interview with Kelley Dempsey with NIST. I hope you learned a lot in the show. I sometimes like to get deeper and more in the weeds on IT security, just to remind us that we need to govern the ship. And although we're not doing the work ourselves, we need to take ownership of all of these areas, regardless of how obscure and mundane they may be. So if you enjoyed the show, please go to iTunes and leave a comment there. It really helps the show from a trust and credibility on iTunes, and helps us be found by the community of IT decision makers and security professionals in the community. I also want to thank Red Zone Technologies, our sponsor for IT security assessments. Go to redzonetech.net if you are interested in engaging and talking about IT security assessments. Thank you, and until the next show, everyone enjoy your day.
So there you have it. This wraps another episode of Bill Murphy's Red Zone podcast. To get all the relevant show notes, please go to our blog at www.redzonetech.net podcast. Additionally, make sure you go to iTunes and leave your comments in iTunes about the show. This helps our show rankings enormously and it helps support the show. Until next time, I appreciate you very much for listening. Thank you.